Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our tech webinar. And today I would like to take this opportunity to thank for your valuable time to join our webinar this morning. Quick introduction of myself. My name is Faosiyas, to be known as Jelly. I am a tech manager of tech practice group at DFDL based in Phnom Penh. And today as well, I will be a moderator to all the course of this webinar. The topic of today will be discussed about the VAT on non-resident e-commerce activity, which I believe that this topic we already bring up to discuss last year. With the recently update the practice and regulation issued by the Ministry of Economy and Finance as well as the General Department of Taxation, I would like to provide a little bit brief about the who impact on the practice. So if you are a non-resident person and you don't have the permanent establishment in the Kingdom of Cambodia and you would like to provide the digital good or digital service and e-commerce activity in the Kingdom of Cambodia, you are required to register via simplified VAT registration with the GDT when your turnover reaches the threshold determined by the practice, and you are required to collect the VAT from the resident person who are not self-assessment taxpayer and pay the VAT to the GDT. One more thing, if you are self-assessment taxpayer in Cambodia and you receive the supply of digital good, digital service, or e-commerce activity from non-resident supplier who are not who do not have the permanent establishment in the Kingdom of Cambodia, you are required to pay the VAT on behalf of the non-resident person via the reverse charge mechanism. And today as well, because the implementation of the practice is taken into effect by this month, meaning that from the April monthly tax return onward, and the deadline would be due by 25th May 2022 this month as well. So I would like to inform you that the topic today would be presented by Mr. Clint O'Connell, our tech partner at the FDL based in Phnom Penh, and he will provide the overall overview about the VAT on e-commerce, joined together by Ms. Vajiravann Chamnan, our tech director. She will provide the overall about the compliance, penalty, and exemption about the VAT on e-commerce. One more thing, if you have any question or need further clarification, please feel free to drop your comment or your question in our chat room. So your question will be selected to be discussed or further clarified at the end of this webinar. I believe that our audience are keen to learn more about the topic of today. So without further delay, I would like to invite Mr. Clint to be on board with us to provide the overall overview about the topic of today. So please join me in welcome Mr. Clint to be on board. Thank you.
So thank you, Jelly, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for attending the presentation this morning. As Jelly mentioned, we had put on a few webinars last year on e-commerce, but we thought it was a good opportunity to go back and review some of the key points, in particular the obligations for self-assessment taxpayers in Cambodia, given that the first return that would be due to be filed would be this month. As Jelly mentioned, the VAT e-commerce regulations came into effect in Cambodia on the 1st of April 2022, after they were delayed a couple of times by the GDT. So I had the relatively easy job this morning of just giving you some background about the e-commerce regulations in Cambodia, and to look at some of the key terms which would hopefully help you to understand what the obligations are for yourself. So the first slide we have here is with respect to the applicable regulations with respect to e-commerce. So The law on taxation, and probably more specifically the tax on income praka, first introduced some concepts around e-commerce and tax into the regulations in Cambodia. So the 2020 tax on income praka expanded the definition of what is considered to be a permanent establishment to include e-commerce activities that are carried out by a non-resident supplier to customers in Cambodia. We then also have the e-commerce law, which, whilst not specifically referring to VAT, it does provide some interesting issues which we're still looking to get clarification from the Ministry of Post and Telecommunications and the Ministry of Commerce, in particular the requirement for e-commerce providers to obtain licenses and permits. There's still some uncertainty as to whether that requirement to obtain licenses and permits only applies to Cambodian e-commerce entities or also to non-resident entities as well. Then we start getting into the more specific tax regulations. So in April last year, the Sub-Decree 65 was issued, and that really was the first regulation which introduced this concept of VAT on e-commerce. It introduced some key terms such as a definition of digital products and services, what is considered to be a e-commerce activity. It also introduced the concept of a VAT reverse charge. So I will be discussing later on in my slides some of these key terms, so hopefully to give you a better understanding as to what they relate to. Then later in the year, last year, we had the Praka 542 that was issued, and that really introduced the nuts and bolts around the obligations for registration for non-residents in Cambodia, and also some of the specifics with respect to invoicing and also some requirements on the VAT reverse charge. And my colleague Ravan will go into more detail on those specifics later in the webinar. Instruction 20522, which was issued in December last year, went even further because there were still some areas of uncertainty. So the instruction provided even further clarity on some of the aspects of the implementation of the e-commerce VAT sub-decree. And then just recently, we had instruction 6900, which provided some specific guidance for self-assessment taxpayers with respect to the submission of the VAT reverse charge declaration, which, as Jelly mentioned, the filing date for the first return for those taxpayers who would be affected would be by the 25th of this month. And then what we are expecting to be issued very soon, if it hasn't been issued today already, is another instruction which relates to more on the for the non-resident e-commerce providers who have registered for VAT. And this instruction will give some further clarity on how to complete the online declaration form for these non-residents, and also provide some guidance on the VAT payment process. In particular, the tax department in Cambodia is allowing non-residents to pay directly to the GDT's bank account via Acleda and ABA. So a non-resident would be able to make a payment to the GDT from overseas, which would be of benefit for them to avoid having to open up a bank account in Cambodia or to use a local agent to assist. Next slide, please. So just some recent regional developments and also some background as to why we are looking now at these e-commerce tax regulations. So with the event of COVID, we've seen a dramatic rise in e-commerce activities, combined with a drop in revenue for most governments around the world. So governments, including Cambodia, are always looking for ways to booster their tax revenue base, and e-commerce transactions in particular have been under scrutiny for some time. That was evidenced with the BEPS project, which was the second point on the slide, which specifically looked at the tax challenges involved in the digital economy, where effectively you have non-residents providing services or goods to customers in jurisdictions where they have no physical presence. Now, Cambodia is definitely not alone in introducing e-commerce tax regulations. So as you can see, a number of the other Asian countries have to some degree also incorporated similar regulations, Laos PDR being the most recent and probably at first glance the most comprehensive, where they are requiring non-residents not just to register and collect VAT, but also to pay corporate tax and collect withholding tax in some circumstances from their customers. Vietnam, which Cambodia often follows when it comes to regulations and policy updates, has for some time enacted a framework for e-commerce tax. They have an interesting regime where, in addition to the standard VAT withholding tax collection, which is done under a foreign contractor tax mechanism, they were also looking at the ability to use banks and financial intermediaries to act as withholding tax agents to collect payments from customers who may not be registered for tax in Vietnam. Indonesia has also enacted e-commerce tax regulations, and what's unique about Indonesia is they also created a digital PE definition, which moved away from the traditional PE definition, which looks traditionally at physical presence or agency. So there is a specific digital PE definition in Indonesia, which looks more at the amount of transactions and the estimated revenue from sales that a non-resident e-commerce provider may have to customers in Cambodia. Then finally, Thailand and Singapore have gone the more conventional route, where they are just requiring non-residents who meet a certain threshold to register for VAT. Next slide, please. So this issue around taxation of non-resident e-commerce providers is not new or novel to Cambodia, and in the recent Cambodia Digital Economy Framework report, this issue was touched on, where, as you can see, that the key challenge for the tax administration for Cambodia, which is also recognized as a global issue, is how to tax cross-border e-commerce where the non-resident suppliers do not have a physical presence or a permanent establishment in the country. And as you can see, different jurisdictions have different approaches to how they look to tax. Some jurisdictions have introduced a digital service tax. Some have introduced some type of corporate tax, and some have just looked to introduce a VAT tax, which is essentially which Cambodia, the route that Cambodia has followed to date. Next slide, please. So just for those who like, I guess, visual illustration, the scenario we have here is we have, say, a multinational entity. To pick an example, that could be Netflix. And so Netflix may have customers in different jurisdictions, country A, country B, and country C, where they provide their online streaming services. Now, Netflix would not actually have a physical presence in country A, B, and C, so it wouldn't have, for example, a incorporated company or a tax registration, which historically made it difficult for these countries to tax Netflix. In the Cambodian context, of course, if the services were being provided to a registered taxpayer, there was the ability in some circumstances for the withholding tax regime to effectively tax the corporate tax for the non-resident. But for VAT, up until last year, there was no mechanism. So these VAT regulations are really being put in place by Cambodia to allow them to obtain the VAT on services provided by a non-resident who does not have a physical presence or legal presence in Cambodia. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so Sub-Decree 65 that was issued in April last year was really the end product of a article which has existed for some time in the law on taxation. And the article basically provides that where a supplier is not registered for business in Cambodia, the tax department has the ability to implement certain conditions by which VAT can be collected from the supplier, and these conditions would be provided by sub-decree. And so therefore, the sub-decree 65 is the sub-decree referred to in Article 75(2) of the law on taxation. Next slide, please. And so the purpose and goal of Sub-Decree 65 was to define the conditions and to provide a rollout mechanism for the implementation of VAT on digital products, services, and also activities that are consumed in Cambodia and provided by non-resident taxpayers that do not have a permanent establishment. And the key point there really is, well, with a number of key points, but one of them is that VAT is a consumption tax. So the key point here is that these services or products are actually being consumed in Cambodia, and that is why the tax department is looking to apply this VAT obligation. The coverage of the sub-decree refers to the electronic supply of products or services or e-commerce activities which are carried out by non-resident suppliers to customers in Cambodia. Customers in Cambodia can include individuals, so typically we refer to that as a B2C transaction, but can also involve registered taxpayers, which would typically be referred to as a B2B transaction. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the key terms which we think that you should be aware of in Sub-Decree 65. So what is a digital service? Digital service very broadly means a service that is provided via an electronic system. And we'll provide some examples of that in the later slides. Digital good refers to a intangible product which is ordered, supplied, or delivered electronically. And then finally, electronic commerce refers to the activities of purchasing, selling, leasing, or exchanging products or services. Next slide, please. So this is sort of an internal poll, which you could maybe test yourself. So for the activities listed below, which ones constitute an e-commerce activity? And the examples we have is purchasing a computer online, paying, say, a monthly subscription to Netflix, advertising on Facebook or Meta as it is referred now, or an online medical consultation, or all of the above. So if you answered 5, all of the above, then you would have answered correctly that all of these activities would be considered to be e-commerce activities under Subdecree 65. Next slide, please. And so Subdecree 65 has an annex which lists a whole lot of e-commerce activities which the VAT obligations would apply to. And as you can see, they're fairly comprehensive, and rather than go through them individually over the next few slides, I'll just try and break them down and give you some practical examples. Next slide, please. So the list in the annex can be simplistically split into 4 sections. We have what's considered to be online purchases of tangible and intangible goods, software licensing and related services, online auctions and online services, and then finally advertising or streaming. Next slide, please. So look, if you look at online purchases, so this is typically where you are ordering products via an online website. And so the example here would be if you were to order perfume from an online website, that would be considered to be an online purchase. Can also include digital products that you use for either private or commercial use. So if you were to go online, if you were, for example, giving a presentation or preparing a report and you wanted to purchase some images to put in your presentation or report, if you were to go online and acquire those from an entity like Shutterstock, then that would be considered to be an online purchase. Next slide, please. Software licensing and related services. So this includes limited duration software. So if you were acquiring antivirus software for your laptops, that would come under that category. Also, if you were acquiring single-use software, so for example, software as a service, platform as a service, or infrastructure as a service, that would also be considered to fall under software licenses. Also importantly, includes data warehousing services. So this is services that are typically provided by Oracle or Amazon as examples. Cloud would also be, cloud services would also be recognized as software storage service that would come under this category. Next slide, please. Online auctions and online services. So this would include activities such as eBay and web store. Also online services, which is quite interesting. I know that we have some accounting firms and maybe law firms who are attending. If you were a self-assessment taxpayer in Cambodia and you received some legal advice, say from a lawyer in Singapore, or maybe some advice about architecture or medical advice, if that was received via an online consulting service, which includes email, which is very interesting, then that would also be considered to be an online service. So it's a very broad definition. Next slide, please. And then finally, advertising and streaming, which I think is probably one of the more easier categories to identify. So normally social media advertising, and then online streaming, which includes most of you know around Netflix or Amazon or HBO. These would all to be fall under the category of advertising and streaming. Next slide, please. So coming to the end of my section, so I just wanted to end with some key points that I've come across with our clients, and also with dealing with the General Department of Taxation. And so I just wanted to illustrate some of the points for your benefit, and then, sorry, sure what happened there. Could we go back? Thank you. Right. Yeah, so just want to illustrate some of these key points, and then if you have any further questions, there's going to be, as Jelly mentioned, a large amount of time dedicated to a Q&A at the end of this webinar. So the first point is that for self-assessment taxpayers, and by self-assessment taxpayers, we are referring to medium and large taxpayers, the obligation to apply the reverse charge mechanism applies on transactions not just with non-resident suppliers who are not registered for VAT in Cambodia, but also for those suppliers, non-resident suppliers, who are registered for VAT in Cambodia. Second point is small taxpayers are exempted from the reverse charge obligation for 5 years, and Vajiravann will go into that in more detail, but ultimately that's going to reduce the compliance cost for small taxpayers in Cambodia. This is another key issue. A non-resident who registers for VAT under the simplified VAT registration in Cambodia is not considered to be a self-assessment taxpayer. And this is important when looking at things such as the application of withholding tax, which goes on to the next point. If you are a self-assessment taxpayer and you receive a VAT invoice from a registered non-resident, you would still be required to withhold withholding tax, because that non-resident is only registered for VAT in Cambodia. They're not registered for corporate tax, and withholding tax is effectively a collection of corporate tax on behalf of the non-resident. So that again is another important point to note, and a question that has often come up with our clients is, if we receive or if we pay VAT, are we still required to withhold withholding tax? And the answer is yes, you are. The General Department of Taxation has confirmed that the registration of VAT by a non-resident e-commerce provider in itself will not create a permanent establishment for that non-resident e-commerce provider. Although we suspect that this interpretation may change over time if the tax department wants to collect more revenue in the future. Self-assessment taxpayers who carry out non-taxable supplies, so these would be, for example, financial institutions, banks, insurance companies, they are still required to apply the reverse charge on transactions with e-commerce non-resident e-commerce suppliers. So even though these entities that carry out non-taxable supplies cannot claim an input credit, they are still obliged to carry out the reverse charge obligation and pay VAT on behalf of the non-resident. And then finally, one point which has come up a lot with our clients is, in order for a transaction to be considered to be B2B in Cambodia, one of the key points which most taxpayers struggle with is that they need to provide their registered bank account, which by registered I mean related to the actual tax number that has been registered with the GDT, in order for the transaction to be considered as B2B. So if the registered bank account of a self-assessment taxpayer is not provided to a non-resident e-commerce provider who is VAT registered, then the transaction would be treated as B2C and not B2B. And Vajiravann will go into more detail about the distinction between B2B and B2C. So that's all for me as by way of introduction. I look forward to answering your questions at the end of this webinar. And I now pass over to my colleague, Ms. Ravan to discuss the VAT e-commerce compliance and exemption. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clint. I hope that everyone here can get the key point, especially the overview for the VAT e-commerce implementation in Cambodia. This is very important before we go into detail, and Clint has provided a very, detailed explanation. What is the key term, digital goods, digital service, e-commerce activity, including the key point about the implementation for this VAT treatment. So as Clint mentioned, now it's my turn to explain more detail about the key point that Clint just highlighted in his previous slide. So let's go together and discuss what is the detailed key point of the VAT e-commerce. So as you can see in this slide, the prakas and subdegree 65 and the subsequent notification and instruction for the VAT on e-commerce, we need to understand who will be impacted by all this law, provision. So the first is the non-resident supplier who have supplied digital good, digital service, and including the electronic platform operator into the Kingdom of Cambodia, and they meet the requirement to register as the simplified VAT registration. So in the next slide, I will explain you in more detail what is the criteria that the non-resident supplier they need to register as the simplified VAT registration. The second person that affected by this practice is the self-assessment taxpayer. Meaning, if you are a self-assessment taxpayer in Cambodia, either a small taxpayer, medium or large taxpayers, you are required to that you receive the supply of digital goods, digital service, or e-commerce activity from the non-resident. You need to know what are your obligations, what you need to do in order to fulfill the tax obligation and to minimize, avoid any tax risk. So next slide, please. Here is the summary of the main obligation that the non-resident supplier they need to fulfill under the VAT e-commerce law. So the first point is the simplified VAT registration. They need to register if they meet the condition. Secondly, you will know what is the obligation of the non-resident once they register in Cambodia. And the third point is about the registration procedure and timeline. You will know as well what they need to do in case they want to exit the supply for digital goods, digital service, or e-commerce activity in Cambodia. So we will go now to the simplified VAT registration slide. Okay, please. All right, as I mentioned, this is, I hope that the flowchart can help you to understand easily for the condition and criteria that non-resident supplier, they register for the VAT, the simplified VAT e-commerce in Cambodia. First is that if you are a non-resident supplier and you supply the digital good, again, digital service or e-commerce activity, including the electronic platform operator, of course, you are required to check yourself whether you have the PE in Cambodia. The PE here, I hope that most of everyone here, you understand what is the PE, the permanent establishment condition in Cambodia. The PE refer to the non-resident that they like work warehouse, they have the brand, they have the rep office, or they have the employee to perform their work or service in Cambodia and other conditions that you can refer to more detail about the PE condition in the law on taxation or the Prakas Tax on Income 098 for more detail about the PE. And then let's say you are a non-resident supplier and you don't have the PE in Cambodia, but your supply for the digital good or service or e-commerce activity in Cambodia meets the threshold, I mean that your expected turnover or your estimate, I mean your turnover can be more than 250 million Khmer. As you can see in the slide, more than 62.5K per year, or you expect that your turnover for 3 consecutive months, it can be more than 15K. So it is the case, of course, you meet the criteria to register for the simplified VAT registration. So in that case, there are 2 ways that you can register. First, you can do the online registration. Also can, as you can see in the flow chart, you can have a physical registration at the GDT. So you may wonder, how can I do the online registration, or how I can do the physical registration with the GDT? Because I'm a non-resident, I don't have any staff, I don't have, anyone to perform such work for me. So to answer all these questions for the e-registration, of course, I can say that it's easy. You just go to the GDT website, and there is an icon that you can select the e-commerce transaction, and then you can click it, and you go to the process for the VAT e-commerce registration. In the next slide, I will show you what it looks like. And for the physical, please go back. And for the physical registration at the GDT, of course, if you are a non-resident, you don't have any staff here, you can assign the tax agent to assist you for the registration process, like us. And for us, we have assist many, several non-resident suppliers to register with the GDT. And I can say that based on our experience, the process and the supporting document to support with the registration is not much difficult. For the registration fee, it's the same as you register for the company. The registration fee is 400 Khmer, is approximately 100 USD. And once you register, once you submit all the information and required document for simplified VAT registration within 7 to 10 working days, of course, the GDT will publish you the 3 documents for the simplified VAT registration. As you can see in this slide, they have the certificate for simplified VAT registration, tax registration card, and the letter of the notification for the non-resident supplier obligation. Okay, move to the next slide. This is for the physical, or we can say manual registration. To register for the VAT e-commerce with the National Tax School of the GDT, you need to complete the form we call NO 76, the application form for simplified VAT registration of the non-resident. Complete all the required information, including the non-resident address, email, business activity, the representative, the turnover, and attach along with the supporting document, including the registration of the non-resident supplier in overseas, the photo, passport, valid passport of the representative, and the last document is the bank confirmation. The bank confirmation here, there are some questions from our client whether they need to open the bank account in Cambodia or what, because because there is a requirement to submit the letter confirmation for the bank account. Actually, for this point, it refers to the bank at the overseas, the country that you are registered with. So there's no need to register the local bank in Cambodia. This is for the manual registration, and for the online, go to the next slide. Here is, as I told you, you can go to the GDT website, and then you go to the e-tax service. There is a web app that they put e-commerce tax system. You click on it, and then you will see the next screen. Please go to the next slide. Here is, when you click on it, of course, you will see all these four items. And for registration purpose, you just click to the enterprise registration request. And then when you click it, you just follow the step that the GDT require you to complete information, which is quite the same for the manual registration. Okay, next slide, please. Here is the example. Let's say after you register, you submit document, the GDT will provide you the 3 type of document that I just mentioned. The simplified VAT registration certificate, as you can see in the slide. Second is the letter confirmation of your tax obligation that you need to fulfill once you register as the simplified VAT registration. Last document is the tax registration card, that you can use that you need that card. I mean the tax identification number to support in your invoice or to declare tax for the e-filing. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, let's say you are registered, but actually when you register, somehow you need to change your address, you need to change your enterprise name or your representative. So in that case, after you register, you can do the tax update as I believe that everyone here, that you need to do the tax update for the Cambodian entity if you are registered. So the fee is also the same, is 200 Khmer, it's approximately 50 USD for the change and update information. Next slide, please. Okay, for the next slide is your obligation. Let's say now you are the non-resident supplier and you successfully register as the simplified VAT registration. So the next question is what I need to do. What are under the VAT e-commerce rule, what I need to fulfill in order to comply with the Cambodian tax regulation. So here is the
Hello, Ravan. Sorry, you are on mute.
sorry. Okay, so let's take a look on this slide. So if you are a non-resident supplier and you supply digital good and digital service or e-commerce activity in Cambodia, you need to collect the 10% VAT from first the resident individual, or we can say the customer that are not registered as assessment taxpayer. And secondly, if you also require to collect the VAT from the assessment taxpayer that failed to provide their tax registration number in Cambodia and settle the payment to the supplier via the company bank account, which is this point Clint already mentioned in his slide as well about the condition, I mean the current condition that required by the GDT to treat the business as B2B or B2C. And if you are a non-resident supplier, let's say, and you are supplied to the assessment taxpayer, which they provide their TIN number to you, they also confirm that this is the company bank account that they pay to you as the non-resident supplier. So in that case, you are not required to collect the VAT. Because your customer, I mean, as the assessment taxpayer, they will do the VAT reverse charge. For the VAT reverse charge mechanism, please no worry, we will discuss in the next slide. So in that case, you just you're not required to collect VAT, but still you are required to complete the tax form for the non-resident supplier, which we call the form NO VAT 01 and Appendix 2. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. This is the summary from what I explained earlier. As you can see in this slide, this is the obligation for you as the non-resident supplier. And I already discussed what is the condition that you are required to charge the VAT and what condition that you are not required to charge the VAT. So, and as you can see in this slide, if you are, again, just to recap from what I explained earlier, if you are provided taxable supply to the customer who failed to provide their TIN and bank account, so of course you are required to charge and collect VAT. And the form that you need to declare is we call the form NO VAT 01 and Appendix 1, and Appendix 2 or you can do through the e-filing by following the instruction 6900 for that one. And the second flow chart here, you can see if you are supplied to the assessment taxpayer that they fulfill their obligation and requirement under the B2B condition. Of course, you does not require to charge the VAT, but you also require to complete the tax form. I will, in the next slide, I will show you what the tax form will look like. So please no worry. And like the deadline for the filing of the non-resident, if you are file manual, it will be fall on 20th of the following month. However, if you use the e-filing, the deadline is on 25th of the following month. Okay, can we move to the next slide, please? The next slide here is the tax form that I explained you earlier. The tax form we call an VAT01. You can find this form in the GDT website as well. It has been uploaded, and this is the Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, which it lists down the transaction that you need to complete as the non-resident supplier. The Appendix 1, it refers to the supply to the consumer who is individual or not registered for tax. The Appendix 2 is the supply that you provide the digital good, digital service, or e-commerce activity to the assessment taxpayer. So this is the main distinction between the Appendix 1 and Appendix 2. This is the core concept for you, and when you go to the online filing, if you understand this core concept, what we experience is the same. So can we move to the next slide? This is the online declaration. Again, you just go to the GDT website and you will see this 4 icon, and you click on the enterprise declaration list and follow the procedure information that you need to complete for the e-filing, VAT e-filing. Okay, next slide, please. I'm here to discuss about the payment method. You also, as a non-resident supplier, you also wonder how you can declare your VAT to the GDT. There are 3 ways that you can do it. First, you can pay directly from the local bank to the in cash or through e-payment to the bank account of the GDT. And to do this transfer, the first method you can do through the tax agent. Or second method, you can use the credit card or debit card. And the three method, the method number 3 is to transfer the payment from your overseas bank account to the GDT bank account. For your note, if you process the VAT payment through the method number 2 or number 3, it is recommended or advisable that you need to make the payment at least a week before the deadline. Let's say if the deadline for e-filing is due by 25th, you need to make you need to be ready and prepare the transfer for the VAT filing at least on 19 or 20 to avoid any late penalty. Okay. Next slide, please. Next slide is the invoicing condition that you should aware as well. If you register as the simplified VAT registration for the B2B, what kind of invoice that you should be issue, and B2C, what kind of invoice that you should issue. So first is to discuss about the B2B invoicing criteria. As you can see in the sub-degree and also Prakas 542 and subsequent instruction 20522, the invoice criteria for the B2B is that you need to include your enterprise, your tax registration number, address, and especially you need to include your customer, their TIN number, their address, whether they are in Cambodia, and the unit price and the total price, which is include VAT. Okay, next one, we will see the invoice criteria for B2C. For B2C, it's quite similar to the B2B invoicing criteria. The difference, I can say that the main difference is about the the customer information, because as you know that the B2C is to the consumer, which is not registered for tax. So in that case, I mean the non-resident supplier does not require to include their TIN number or the company name in the invoice. They just include the customer information such as the customer name, address, or email, and the total price, which is include the VAT, because for the B2C transaction, as you are a registered non-resident supplier, you need to charge VAT. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is the registration process. As you may wonder, let's say, okay, now I no longer supply for digital goods, digital service, or e-commerce in Cambodia. So how can I deregister from the system in Cambodia? Following the instruction, the guideline under the Prakas 542, of course, if you would like to deregister, you need to pay all the VAT liability with respect to the VAT e-commerce to the General Department of Taxation. And within 15 days, you must submit the application letter to the GDT to inform about your closure of business in Cambodia. Next slide. Now, after we discuss and explain about the non-resident supplier obligation under the VAT e-commerce rule, let's discuss again together for the obligation if you are a self-assessment taxpayer in Cambodia, which I believe that everyone here also would like to understand, because as Bong Jelly and Clint mentioned, for the VAT e-commerce transaction, the GDT will implement from 1st April this year onward, which is the deadline will be fall on 25th of this month, that you need to declare your tax if you have any transaction related to the VAT e-commerce. So let's say if you are a self-assessment taxpayer, of course, under this, if you have any transaction with the non-resident supplier for the VAT e-commerce, you need to have obligation to do the VAT reverse charge. So next slide, please. This is the summary of the rule of the registered taxpayer under the VAT reverse charge mechanism. And I'm sure that most of us know what is the VAT reverse charge mechanism, right? So just to recap again, the VAT reverse charge mechanism, as you can see in this slide, this is a requirement that if you are a registered taxpayer in Cambodia and have the transaction with a non-resident supplier regarding to the digital good, digital service, or e-commerce activity, you need to account, you need to account the VAT on behalf of the non-resident supplier, regardless of whether they are registered or not, as a simplified VAT registration. And second point that you need to note is the payment that of the VAT that you collect on behalf of the non-resident supplier, you need to declare not later than 25th of the following month. This is the deadline for the e-filing, and for the manual declaration due by 2020 of the following month. The third point is that you need to aware is that because there's a lot of questions that we receive from our client and through the webinar that we conduct, as Clint mentioned in previous year or recently, the question is if I pay the VAT reverse charge to the GDT on behalf of the non-resident supplier, whether I can claim it as the input or not. So to answer this, based on the Prakas and a subsequent provision of the VAT e-commerce, the answer is yes, you can claim it as the VAT input as long as you have paid the VAT reverse charge to the GDT by following the VAT input criteria based on the Article 21 to 41. except Article 40 of the Law on Taxation and the VAT subdegree. So next slide, please. This is the monthly VAT filing and payment. Let's say you receive the supply and from the non-resident supplier, as we summary earlier, you must do the VAT reverse charge. And the form that you are required to complete is we call the form and/or VAT 02, Appendix 1 or Appendix 2. So if you look at the previous slide that I just present, for the non-resident, they declare the VAT, but they declare in the form and/or VAT 01. But for the self-assessment taxpayer in Cambodia, you declare the VAT reverse charge under the form and/or VAT 02. So the next slide, you will see how it looked like for that form. Okay. This is the flow chart to summary the VAT reverse charge that I'm sure that you need to be aware of. So as you can see in this flow chart, let's say if you receive digital good or digital service from a VAT simplified registered non-resident supplier, of course you are not required to charge. You could require to do the VAT reverse charge, as you can see in this slide, and complete in the form we call and/or VAT 02 Appendix 2, because Appendix 2 it refers to the supplier that they are registered, whereas the Appendix 1 they refer to the non-resident supplier that are not registered for the VAT. Okay, this is the form that I just mentioned here. It is we call and/or VAT 02, Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, which you need to complete for the manual filing. And for the e-filing, it's the same concept, as long as you understand the principle that you need to apply the VAT reverse charge. You also can do through the e-filing online as well. I'm sure that somehow, because we have the time limitation, so in case you have any question or concern regarding to what I have explained that it's not clear, or you verify anything, please take note and we can discuss during the Q&A session. Okay, so go to the next slide. This is for the online filing, which I'm sure that because everyone here, maybe most of us have done the e-filing for your monthly tax every month. So for the VAT reverse charge, you just go to the same icon we call e-filing for the web application. You click on that one, and then you will see on the screen. Please go to next slide. When you click on this, you will see the screen, and you will notice that there is a button for the list of the digital good or digital service for VAT reverse charge that you can complete your transaction in that system and follow the procedure that required by the GDT. For the detailed procedure, I strongly suggest that you can go through in detail for the VAT reverse charge declaration for the e-filing through this instruction 6900, which has recently issued by the GDT. And you also can find this instruction through the GDT website as well. However, in case you could not find, of course, feel free to contact us. We are happy to instruct you or guide you more on how it will work for the VAT reverse charge filing. Next slide. This is the example for B2B, which I hopefully that it can help you to understand more easily in addition to what we have explained you in writing. So for B2B, let's say company Z and company Y. For company Z, it refers to the non-resident supplier that let's say they are registered or they haven't registered for the simplified VAT registration, and they supply the online image, which is fall under the VAT e-commerce supply rule, to company Y, who is a registered taxpayer in Cambodia, and they following the condition to be considered as B2B. So in that case, what is the obligation that company Y need to do? As we explained earlier, of course, the company Y first they need to pay the fee for buying the image, online image from company Z, and they need to declare the VAT reverse charge of 10% of the invoice. I mean the price of the image they purchase from company Z to the GDT by the deadline, and at the same time, once they do the VAT reverse charge and claim and pay to the GDT, they also can claim as the input following the the condition rule as stated in the Prakas 542 in the same month or subsequent month, depend on their intention. So let's go to the next slide. This slide is B2B again, but you know what is the difference between the previous slide and this slide? This slide, it just want you to understand more, because as Clint mentioned, we have obtained a lot of questions from the client, and to understand whether they, in case they supply of, they receive or they make any payment related to digital service or e-commerce activity that are subject to 14% withholding tax. They really want to understand whether they still need to do the VAT reverse charge again or not, because from their point of view, they think that this kind is like double tax when they pay like withholding tax and also the VAT to the GDT on only for one transaction. So this example is just to clarify all this question. So let's say you are a company B and you are a registered taxpayer in Cambodia, and you receive, you make any payment related to management service, and assume that management service is subject to 14% withholding tax based on the domestic rule. So in that case, what you need to do is, as assessment taxpayer, first you need to withhold the withholding tax from that management service that you pay to the company A. Secondly, you also need to fulfill the obligation under the VAT reverse charge, as what we discussed. Maybe you think that it seems like I paid double tax, right? But actually, it's not double tax, because as you know that the withholding tax based on the domestic rule and the concept of the domestic law in Cambodia, withholding tax is the tax of the income recipient, meaning you are only have obligation to withhold the tax and pay the GDT. Is not your tax. For the VAT, it's the consumption tax. Even you do the VAT reverse charge, but you also can claim the input. So in this it means it's just only the timing issue of your payment only. You are not pay any double tax in that case. So this is the concept for the 14% withholding tax and VAT reverse charge. So can we move to the next slide? This is the exchange rate for the VAT calculation. We have some questions from the non-resident supplier, also assessment taxpayer, about how they can use the exchange rate to declare their tax. Because as you know, when they supply their service, digital good or e-commerce to customer in Cambodia, they not issue in, let's say, Khmer currency. They can issue in other foreign currency like USD or Thai baht or something, depend on their invoice rules. So in that case, when they declare the tax, it means they need to convert for the foreign currency into the Khmer currency based on the exchange rate that issued by the National Bank of Cambodia on the last working day of the month. So let's say if you declare your tax in April 2022 this year, so to get the exchange rate, in order to calculate your VAT declaration and payment, you need to check on the on the National Bank of Cambodia website and click on, let's say this month it falls on 31st April. So you need to see on that day what is the exchange rate and use it to calculate your VAT payment. For the self-assessment taxpayer, of course, you can declare your VAT following the, I'm sure everyone here know the instruction 27617. It's about the notification. Sorry, it's about the instruction from the TDT on the exchange rate for the purpose of tax declaration. Okay. So next slide, please. So for the next slide is the discussion for the taxable value and supply. So for the taxable value, it means what is the taxable value that we need to take to calculate the VAT on e-commerce. So the taxable value here is referred to the price of the digital good, digital service, or e-commerce activity that the non-resident supplier charge to customer. And in case the taxable value, I mean that the TDT view that the taxable value is not represent the market value. They, of course, they have the right to determine unless there is a fiction document from non-resident supplier to justify why the price is why the price that they charge to customer is on market value. For the time of supply, if you are a non-resident payer in Cambodia, the time of supply is the early year of the time where the invoice is issued, or the time by the digital good, digital service has been delivered or provided to your customer, or at the payment that, or at the time that the payment you receive. This is the time of supply if you are a non-resident supplier. How about the self-assessment taxpayer? For the self-assessment taxpayer, the time of supply for the VAT e-commerce that you are required to do the VAT reverse charge and pay to the TDT is the earlier that you receive the digital good or digital service or e-commerce activity from the non-resident supplier, or when at the time that the payment is due or paid. This is the key difference between the time of supply for non-resident supplier and the self-assessment taxpayer. Next slide, please. This is the exemption for VAT e-commerce. You may wonder what are the conditions that the non-resident or the self-assessment taxpayer they can receive under the VAT e-commerce rule. Of course, if the non-resident supplier, when they register, I mean, unlike for the entity, I mean, the self-assessment taxpayer in Cambodia, when they register, they need to pay registration tax and patent tax. But for the non-resident supplier that they register for simplified VAT registration, there are no requirement for them to pay the patent tax. So we can say this is exempt the benefit for them. And second, tax relief for the self-assessment taxpayer, it refers to the small taxpayer, which they are not required to, I mean, they exempt from the obligation to do the VAT reverse charge for 5 years, starting from the effective date of the Prakas 542, which is from 8 September 2021. So during this period, the small taxpayer does not require to do VAT reverse charge in case they have supplied any, they have received any digital good, digital service, or e-commerce activity from the non-resident taxpayer. But they still need to provide their TIN, and they need to fulfill the B2B condition to obtain all this kind of exemption. Otherwise, they cannot entitle for this exemption. I think this is what we cover this morning. So we will provide more time for everyone here to have the Q&A session, because I'm sure that, as Clint mentioned, even now there is a subsequent instruction and notification issue and clarified by the TDT. I'm sure that it is new to everyone, also for us here. So you may have some question that you would like to clarify with us. So I'll go back to Bong Jelly to help moderate on this Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravan, and thank you so much, Clint, for providing the detailed and very helpful presentation this morning. Yes, of course, we got a lot of questions from our audience. So I would like to pick up the question from our audience in order for Clint or Ravan to clarify on the question. So for the first question that our audience asked during the live event, they asked whether the digital service, including the overseas VAT or GST, the best calculate the reverse charge VAT is the amount before or after VAT or GST. So this question I would like provide to Clint for the answer. Thank you.
Sure, Jelly, thank you. So it's a very good question, and the answer is not clear, unfortunately. So if you receive, so the idea would be that you are a self-assessment taxpayer, you receive an invoice from a non-resident, and the jurisdiction in which that non-resident resides has also applied VAT or GST. And then so the question is, what is the base to determine the reverse charge? Is it the invoice before the overseas VAT or GST, or net of the overseas VAT GST? And so the short answer is it's unclear. The PRACA 542 defines taxable value as the price that's charged by the non-resident seller to the buyer in Cambodia. So would the tax department in Cambodia treat the price as inclusive of overseas VAT or GST? The answer is we simply don't know. It would be one of those things that we would need to get clarification from the GDT on. So I'm sorry, I can't give you a clear answer on that question at this point in time.
Thank you, Clint. So for the question owner, if you want to clarify about the question, you should submit a clarification letter to the GDT to clarify on this point. So I move on to the next question we got from our audience during the live webinar as well. They question us, as per instruction number 2522, if self-declaration taxpayer fail to settle the relevant payment to the non-resident supplier directly by using their own bank account number and enterprise name, they will be deemed as non-registered self-declaration taxpayer. And the non-resident registered supplier will be required to collect the VAT and remit the VAT to the GDT if the transaction had occurred under the B2C model. So the question is this a high-risk area to non-resident registered supplier if the customer deliberated making payment not using their own bank account under their own name to avoid accounting for VAT through reverse charge and move the responsibility to the supplier? Does instruction 2522 have legal binding effect on non-resident supplier? So I will provide this question to Clint for elaboration. Thank you.
Yeah, look, again, that's a very good question. So this is an issue where there's been a lot of pushback against this requirement that was imposed under the instruction. So from the GDT's perspective, what they are trying to say is that the reason why they require the bank account, the registered bank account details to be provided for a transaction to be considered to be B2B is they're concerned about fraud. So, and from their perspective, what they're saying is that if somebody was to fraudulently use the tax number of someone else and supply that to a registered VAT non-resident, then the VAT non-resident may not apply VAT on the transaction, which means that the party would receive the product or service at a lower amount net of VAT. So that's why they have required this additional bank account registration. But frankly, it's just causing all types of difficulties for clients to implement. So you're right that the onus is on the registered VAT non-resident to ensure that the bank account that is provided is in the name of the taxpayer. So it corresponds with the registered name of the taxpayer. If the bank account name does not correspond with the registered taxpayer name, then the transaction needs to be treated as B to C, which is, as Vajiravann mentioned, then the registered VAT non-resident would be charging and collecting VAT. So the onus is on the non-resident who's registered for VAT to clarify. But I understand your point, and I understand the reason that if you are putting the fraud issue aside, if you are a self-assessment taxpayer and you don't want to be bothered with all of this reverse charge obligation compliance, all that you would simply do is not provide your bank account to the registered non-resident, thereby forcing that registered non-resident to issue a VAT invoice, which means that you don't have to worry about the reverse charge as a self-assessment taxpayer. So I think this, in short, I think that this is going to change pretty quickly. This bank account requirement, it's just too problematic. It's causing too many issues. For me personally, what we have recommended to the tax department is that the reverse charge obligation should only apply when a self-assessment taxpayer is dealing with a non-resident who has not registered for VAT in Cambodia. That's the only circumstance where we believe the reverse charge obligation should apply. But for all other transactions, including transactions with registered VAT non-residents, we believe the reverse charge obligation should not apply, which means that the registered non-resident, when they're dealing with individuals or when they're dealing with companies, they charge VAT and collect VAT themselves and do not put that obligation on the business customer. So that's where I think it's going to end up. But in the meantime, we have to go through this process of providing feedback to the tax department to try and improve what is currently not a very ideal situation and not a particularly clear situation.
Thank you, Clint, for answering the question to our audience. So I hope that our audience can get the clear answer of your can get the clear response. So I would like to bring to the one more question. How to define the small taxpayer in terms of yearly revenue, total asset amount, and number of employees? So this question I would like to provide to Vajiravann for clarification. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Bong Jali. So the answer here. Hello. Can everyone hear me?
Yes,
Can
yes,
hear you.
yes.
Can hear you.
Thank you, Clint. Thank you, Bong Jali. So the question here is from the audience, if I understand correctly, they would like to understand the condition of the small taxpayer, right? What is the condition that you are considered as the small taxpayer? Am I right, Bong Jali?
Yes, yes, you are right.
Okay, so this is not really related to the VAT e-commerce, but I'm sure that maybe most of us here have been know what criteria for the small taxpayer. So let's say if you are a sole proprietor or if you are have the turnover more than 250 million per annum, or your estimate turnover more than or up to more than 60 million Khmer Ringgit for the 3 consecutive months. So in that case, you will be considered as the small taxpayer, and your threshold is below I remember 700 million Khmer Ringgit per annum. That in that case, you are considered as the small taxpayer, and this is, let's say, if you are considered as the small taxpayer under the VAT e-commerce rule, as we have defined earlier, you are not required to have the fulfill the obligation for the VAT reverse charge for 5 years, starting from the date of the effective of the Prakas 542, which is from 8 September 2021. So meaning that even you consume any digital service, digital good or e-commerce from the non-resident supplier, you are not required to have to do the VAT reverse charge, but you still need to declare your transaction in the tax form and or VAT 02 and fulfill the condition to be as we discussed earlier.
Thank you, Ravan, for provide the criteria to be classified as the small taxpayer. So I move on to the next question. Our audience asks about the purchasing of computer online is also e-commerce. The purchasing of computer online is also considered as the e-commerce because based on the GDT live stream, the purchase physical good is not subject to VAT reverse charge as there is custom tax charge during the import on those mirror. So our audience would like to know what is our idea. So I would like to provide this question to Clint for clarification. Thank you.
Sure. So the VAT e-commerce regulations do not specifically refer to this issue to do with customs, but logically it makes sense, and I completely agree with the GDT that if you are importing goods into Cambodia and you're paying VAT at customs, then you shouldn't be obliged to pay VAT via the reverse charge. That would mean that VAT has been effectively applied twice on the same transaction. So, but what I would suggest is to obviously keep the custom documentations that evidence that you have paid VAT as supporting documents to ensure that you can provide them if a tax auditor asks in a subsequent tax audit.
Yes, thank you so much, Clint, for the response to our audience. So I would like to move on to the next question. So about what is the criteria to consider as service that provided by non-resident as the digital service? So meaning that our audience would like to know whether what is the criteria or the definition of the digital service. So this question I would like to provide to Clint again to clarify on this.
Yeah, again, it's one of these things where it's fairly broadly defined as any service that is provided electronically. So, you know, the examples that we gave were if for example, you had a service that was provided by email. So if you had some advice provided by email, that would technically constitute an electronic service. If you had some advice provided by a teleconference or even a application or phone call, then those are all considered to be e-commerce services. So simply put, it's a service which has been received by you or consumed by you, and which you have received via some type of electronic means.
Yes, thank you, Clint, for your answer to our audience. So I move on to the next question from our audience as well. What is the claim procedure for VAT input credit after we paid to the GDT? So this one I may provide to Ravan for clarification because this is the first month for us to implement the VAT reverse charge. So Ravan, do you have any idea on this case? Please elaborate. Thank you.
Thank you, Bong Chali. For this one, actually, I briefly update and explain during my presentation. So just to explain, elaborate more on the process of claiming the VAT input in case you have made the VAT reverse charge. So assuming that you are you are assessment taxpayer and you consume the digital good or service or e-commerce activity from the non-resident supplier, who either they register or not register in Cambodia, and you receive the invoice from them, which state clearly about your company information, including your company name, register address, tax identification number, and also you settle the payment through the bank account. We assume that there is no change for this criteria for B2B. So in that case, of course, you are required to do the VAT reverse charge and pay that VAT reverse charge to the GDT. And once you pay, at the same time, you also claim the VAT input that you have paid on the VAT reverse charge to the GDT. For that procedure, if we look at the instruction 6900, which the GDT they have been issued recently, I remember maybe in last month. So if we look at that instruction, you will see that you are required to complete the VAT reverse charge requirement under the e-filing VAT reverse charge function. So once you complete all the required information and update the VAT reverse charge amount in that, I mean that the e-filing reverse charge form of the GDT, and you make the payment to the GDT via e-payment for the VAT reverse charge, then you can claim the input for that VAT reverse charge. However, in case you make you pay the VAT reverse charge not through the e-payment, meaning you make through the agent like Lihu or Tiribunha for the VAT reverse charge, you need to print that receipt and to submit the receipt with the tax officer, and then you can claim back once they approve on the VAT reverse charge receipt. So this is the process for the claiming the VAT input regarding the VAT reverse charge. However, from what we experienced so far, there is still some, I mean, the unclear point regarding to this function. So we can seek further discussion through the GDT hotline, or you can through the GDT chat, or somehow you can further discuss with the tax officer in charge in case you have any something or not clear about the process of claiming. But I still strongly suggest that you can go point by point for the instruction 6900 for the mechanism and procedure for the VAT reverse charge for the self-assessment taxpayer. So then you can understand clearly what you need to do from this month, because as Bong Jelly and Clint mentioned, the deadline that you are required to pay the VAT reverse charge is due by 20 or 25th for the this month for the e-filing. Thank you, Bong Jelly.
Thank you, Ravan, for this clarification. So I would like to move on to the next question. This one, our audience provide a real example. The example is if the company hire a non-resident service provider to support one of the customer in Cambodia, for example, in Cambodia, and once the service finish, invoice will be billed to. Oh, sorry, I am wrong with the question. Just for example, the company hire a non-resident service provider to support one of the customer in other country for relocation service. So once the service is finished, invoice will be billed to the company in Cambodia. Does it consider as the digital service? So this one I would like to provide to Clint for answer. Thank you.
So sorry if I understand the service relates to activities that are performed outside of Cambodia.
Yes, should be like this, because they hire, meaning that they hire one non-resident service provider to support the company, but to support their customer outside Cambodia. But when the service finished, the bill will be issued to Cambodia entity. So this one would be considered as digital service or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately, if the Cambodian customer is receiving the invoice, it doesn't really matter where the service is being consumed. They will still have to apply the VAT reverse charge on the basis that the invoice has been invoiced to a self-assessment taxpayer in Cambodia. So my view would be, unfortunately, that the Cambodian self-assessment taxpayer would still have to apply the reverse charge, even though those services may be consumed outside of Cambodia.
Okay, thank you, Clint, for your answer to our audience. So I would like to move on to the next question. They ask about what the obligation of resident taxpayer who buy the digital goods or service from non-resident taxpayer who has registered via simplified VAT registration with the GDT. And what about the non-simplified VAT registration? Meaning that they would like to know the obligation of the Cambodian taxpayer who received the supply of digital good or digital service from the simplified VAT registration and non-simplified VAT registration. So this one I would like to provide to Ravan clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Bongjali. For the SES, if you are a self-assessment taxpayer in Cambodia and you consume digital goods service from the non-resident supplier, as I mentioned in my slide, regardless they are registered for simplified VAT registration or not in Cambodia, you are required to do the VAT reverse charge. That meaning that you need to account the VAT on behalf of your non-resident supplier and pay to the GDT by the due date. And also you can claim the VAT input as well, following the condition as stated in the input, the VAT input claim of the Prakas 542, as I already explained based on the previous question from our audience. Okay.
Thank you, Ravan. So now I would like to bring the pre-question that our audience asked us during the registration to our webinar. So I believe that Ravan already mentioned during the presentation, but I just would like Ravan to clarify again whether the e-filing is ready for VAT reverse charge declaration and payment, meaning that the e-filing in the GDT system, whether it is ready to use or not. So Ravan, please clarify. Thank you.
Actually, before coming through this point, we understand that actually everyone understand that the sub-degree 65 and Prakas 542 for the VAT e-commerce has been put into enforcement actually since September 2021 last year. However, due to some difficulty and also some unclear point, there's a delay until 1st April 2022 this year. So during this process, I understand that Clint mentioned we work closely with the GDT. The GDT, they have update and develop the VAT e-filing for the VAT reverse charge. So my answer to your question regarding to whether the e-filing is now ready for declaration or not, my answer is yes. And we also have tested, have our client to declare for the VAT reverse charge and e-payment as well. So it is ready now. So you can start declare your tax through the link.
Thank you, Ravan. So for our audience, especially the Cambodian taxpayer, now the e-filing in the GDT system is ready to use. So we can go to test the system together. So I would like to move on to the next question. From our audience from the live also. If Facebook is registered for VAT, I pay VAT and reverse charge and withholding tax. They also provide the example as well on $20 Facebook advertisement, meaning that they will to pay $20 plus $2 plus $2 plus $2.8 or $26.8. So this question I would like to provide to Clint for clarification. Thank you.
Okay, so I think this question covers a lot of the issues that we discussed earlier. If we take the example that you are a medium or large taxpayer in Cambodia, and we use the example that Facebook is registered for simplified VAT in Cambodia. So if Facebook issue you an invoice for advertising, and they don't charge VAT because you have provided them with your tax number and your bank account and your taxpayer name, then you would be obliged to pay VAT on behalf of Facebook via the reverse charge mechanism. So that would be, and the base for that would be $20. So the VAT on the invoice is $2, right? 10% of 20. And then, as Vajiravann mentioned, you can then also claim a corresponding VAT input if you are providing taxable supplies. So you have your output VAT, or not actually output, reverse charge of $2, and then you have your input of $2. So they effectively net each other off. Now, for the withholding tax, it really depends on your contract with Facebook. So how withholding tax is supposed to work is that the withholding tax agent, which is the registered taxpayer in Cambodia, are supposed to withhold withholding tax from the non-resident, which means that if Facebook invoices you $20 and they are a non-resident, then the self-assessment taxpayer is required to withhold 14% of that $20 as a withholding tax. So that, in the perfect world, that withholding tax should not be your cost. It should not be the cost of the self-assessment taxpayer. However, if in your contract Google has said, we don't care about the withholding tax, we still want to receive $20. So that means that you, as the self-assessment taxpayer, you still have to withhold, but the withholding tax now becomes your cost. So you cannot deduct it from the 20. So that's why the contract is so important. You know, ideally, the withholding tax cost should be borne by the non-resident. But if the non-resident has contracted that you are going to bear the cost, you as a taxpayer in Cambodia, then there's not much you can do about it. So then the overall cost to you as the taxpayer is going to be the 14% withholding tax on the $20. Noting that the VAT is going to net off between the reverse charge that you pay on behalf of the non-resident and the input credit you can claim. So overall cost for you is going to be $20 plus 14% withholding tax on 20, which my maths is not so good, but that would be $2.80, right? I think $2.80. $2.80, I think that would be. So that would be your overall cost on that particular transaction. From a cash flow perspective, you're going to have to pay the reverse charge to the tax department. So from a cash flow perspective, that money is coming out, but then you're also going to receive a corresponding input credit, which would offset your output for that particular month.
Yes, thank you, Clint, and I hope that our audience can get the clear answer on this point. And I would like to move on to the next question from our audience during the live webinar as well. Our audience asked that, I live in Cambodia as a foreigner and non-resident and have a small startup e-commerce business supplying Cambodia and other countries, but website is not ready yet. Do I pay withholding tax and VAT? I am not self-assessment taxpayer because I am not a self-assessment taxpayer. Maybe because I do not register for VAT. What is withholding tax? I have PE, so I am not required for simplified VAT in Cambodia, right? So this question I would like to pass to Clint for clarification. Thank you.
Okay, I think that the first point to clarify here is from a tax perspective, there is a difference to make a determination as to whether you are considered to be a tax resident in Cambodia. It's not based on whether you are an expat or a Cambodian individual. So for tax purposes, we look at a number of tests to determine if you are a resident in a particular country. So in Cambodia, for example, if you're physically in Cambodia for more than 6 months in any 12-month period, if you have permanent accommodation available to you in Cambodia, if you have social and economic ties in Cambodia, such as your bank account or family, then you would be considered to be, if you meet, I think it's one of those criteria, you are considered to be a Cambodian tax resident. So I think the first thing to point out is that if you are living in Cambodia, I think you probably would already be considered to be a Cambodian tax resident, right? So then the next point is, as Jelly mentioned, are you required to register as a self-assessment taxpayer? And so the question that Ravan addressed earlier, because you are an individual, you would most likely be considered to be maybe a sole proprietor. So then the question is your expected income for the year going to be less than 60,000 approximately USD? If it's less than 60,000 USD, you probably are not going to be required to register as a small taxpayer, which means that you don't really need to be concerned with withholding tax or VAT or reverse charge. If you do register as a small taxpayer because your revenue is higher than 62,000, then, as Ravan mentioned again, the reverse charge obligation you would not have to be concerned about because you would have, or at least for the next 5 years, because you would have this exemption. So I think the first point again is just to determine whether you are a tax resident in Cambodia. And I think from the basic information that you've given us, I think that you would meet the test to be a tax resident in Cambodia.
Yes, thank you, Clint, for providing the response to our audience. So because of the time, the limitation of the time, maybe I would like to bring up the last question of our webinar. This question would be from the pre-registration from our audience. So the question is, under understand from the law that the company will with turnover more than 60K US dollar need to register. Shall we register now even the annual turnover is not yet reached the 60K amount? So this one I would like to provide to Ravan for clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bong Jelly. Actually, I understand that for this question, you may understand the criteria that you are, if you are a non-resident and you don't have PE and you meet the threshold to register for the simplified VAT registration. Actually, you can register based on the condition, or you can have a voluntary registration as the simplified VAT register non-resident in Cambodia here. So your question is whether there's any benefit that in case even your turnover does not meet, even your supply condition does not meet with the condition to register, do you still, if you want to register, do any benefit from the tax perspective? Actually, if we look at the current relevant, regulation for the VAT e-commerce, there is no any, a clear indication on the benefit in case you would like to have the voluntary VAT registration. But I think that is, more on the, from your perspective, if you expected that your turnover will be meet the threshold or something very soon, or you can of course register with the GDT starting from this one. So this is my answer to you. So this means that you can voluntarily register for VAT simplified registration if you would like to fulfill, I mean to commit yourself to pay tax in Cambodia if you wish to.
Yes, thank you, Rowan. So for the taxpayer that the turnover has not reached the threshold determined at Prakas, you can voluntarily register for the simplified VAT registration. Okay, so just now I mentioned that this is the last question, but because of the one more request from our audience, so I would like to pick up the very last question to our webinar. So the question is there any specific tax rule regulation for VAT treatment on rebate, incentive, and discount to customer in Cambodia? Will this be treated as a part of value of supply? And when the taxpayer is supposed to claim the VAT input under the reverse charge, any limit of term of timing, example, within 3 months from the date of invoice, and any specific rule of time of supply, continuous supply of service. When you mention register bank account, what you mean? All the above questions are more from the perspective of VAT on e-commerce. So this question I would like to provide to Clint for further clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jelly. I saw these questions and they looked quite interesting, which is why I thought we should address them in this webinar. So the first query with respect to are there any specific rules on rebates, incentive and discounts? So there are no specific rules in the VAT e-commerce regulations, but what we have seen domestically and also in the Cambodian domestic VAT regulations is that the tax department in Cambodia always has the right to adjust an invoice value to reflect what they believe is the correct market value. So this rule is even contained in the VAT e-commerce regulations. So in our experience, if, for example, you have, say, a product that you are selling for normally for $10, and then say you discount that to $7, the tax department would still expect VAT to be paid on the $10 under that discount arrangement. So I think there is a real risk that if you were a non-resident providing rebates or discounts or incentives, that there would be the risk that the tax department would deem that you need to use the highest value, which is the pre-discount value, to determine the base to calculate VAT. Secondly, when is a taxpayer supposed to claim the input credit? So again, following Cambodia's domestic regulations and practice, you want to really claim that input VAT in the month in which you have actually received the service, or in this case, paid the reverse charge. So if you were in the future looking to apply for a VAT refund, if the VAT credit is not claimed in the same month in which the service was, or that the invoice was issued, then there's a possibility the tax department could disallow the VAT input credit for the self-assessed taxpayer. There are specific rules for the supply of continuous services. So we do have in the Cambodian e-commerce regulations time of supply rules, and they do also refer to where you have, for example, an ongoing contract where there might be milestones or specific payment dates. So there are specific rules for the time of supply rules for those types of arrangements. When we refer to a registered bank, what we really mean is that the bank account information that's provided to by a self-assessment taxpayer to a registered VAT non-resident would not just have the bank account number, but also the account name of the bank account, and the account name should be the name of the registered taxpayer. So ABC Limited, for example, the account name should be ABC Limited. It shouldn't be a name of an individual. That would not constitute a registered bank account for the purpose of the B2B verification process. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Clint, and thank you to our both speaker for provide a detailed and very fruitful presentation this morning, and also provide a clear clarification and response to our audience. And we apologize that we cannot pick up all the questions of our audience to answer because of the time limitation. So I hope that the presentation today would be very helpful to our audience. Since this month is the first month to apply the VAT e-commerce, so please join together in applying the podcast to avoid the penalty being imposed by the tax authority. So if you have any question or further clarification, please kindly contact us via the contact detail on the screen. Last but not least, we wish you all the best, and we hope to see you again in the next webinar. And we would like to invite you all to scan the barcode in order to conduct the survey. So therefore, please scan the barcode and provide us the feedback. Thank you very much for attending.